and welcome to my channel. Today we're just going to be going through a few very basic beginners techniques for watercolour. I know a lot of you have watched my beginners watercolour video. If you haven't, I'll put the link up there, and that sort of goes through a lot of the basics about your brushes and your water and your paper. But I do realise that sometimes when I'm doing my videos I've perhaps skipped over some things a little bit quickly and I haven't gone into everything. So these are just some techniques that just make life a little bit easier if you know how to do them. So really I want to talk about preserving the white of the paper, because in watercolour, unlike oil and acrylics, when we want white or if we want a paler colour, we use the white of the paper along with the transparent paint. So in order to do that, sometimes when we get carried away in the process of painting, we can forget and paint over an area that we need really for a highlight and to be left lighter. So there are a few ways of doing that. So the first one is using masking fluid. Again, I have done a video on this before. I think I used it for snow, which is, it's very handy to use for snow. So this one's Winsor & Newton, but you can get other brands. And you can get different colours as well. So the handy thing about this one is it dries a little bit sort of yellowy. So once it's dry, it's easy to see where you've put it on your paper. So basically it's like a rubber. You put it on as a liquid, it dries, it saves that white piece of paper, and then afterwards you finish your painting, you just rub it off gently with your finger. Now you perhaps need to test your masking fluid with your papers before you start using it on a finished piece of artwork, because it really depends on the quality of the paper. Sometimes if you have a very inferior quality paper, it will damage the surface of the paper when you take it off. I don't advise leaving it on for more than about 12 hours. So that's another thing. If you leave it for a week and then come back to it again, you might find you damage the paper. So I would advise practicing using whichever masking fluid you've got with whichever papers you've got. Just have some test strips and use those before you go and use it in a painting and risk spoiling your painting. And the other way to not risk spoiling your painting is to be extra gentle when you're taking it off. Don't just get an eraser and rub really hard on your paper. Be very, very gentle with the tip of your finger. Okay, so actually applying the masking fluid to the paper where you want the paper to be preserved, you can buy special brushes that because it does damage your brushes. So this is, it actually says on it, it's an SAA one, and it actually says masking fluid brush, and you can see there's sort of a synthetic white bristle on them. So you can apply it with those, and of course you can get different sizes. Okay, so I'll just pop that one out of the way, give that a good rinse. And also I use shapers. So these are actually made, as they sound, they're made for colour shapers, and they've got a nice taper to them. And again, you can buy different sizes and shapes, but they're basically just rubber. So there's no bristles there, that's like a little rubber tip. And it's really used for sort of shaping, moving your paint around the paper whilst it's wet, and perhaps taking some paint off a little bit and things like that. But I actually use it for putting the masking fluid on as well. As you can see, you can get a finer point with it than you can with the brush. Now if you don't have either of those things, sorry I was putting that away, we still need it, and you've got your own brushes and you don't want to spoil them, one thing I would advise is get a little dish with some washing up liquid in, and then cover your brush with the washing up liquid, just neat washing up liquid. Then use your masking fluid, and then you will find that your brush is much easier to clean because it's got that washing up liquid on it. It comes off easier and the masking fluid doesn't stick to it. So wash them straight away, don't leave them on the side to dry, get that masking fluid off them straight away. Okay, so I'll just pop that to one side, and while that's drying we'll have a look at something else. So the other technique I use is using a resist. So this is a wax oil pastel. So basically where you put this on the paper, the paint can't stick to it. So the only downside to this is you can't remove it. So if you put it in the wrong place, you will really struggle to correct that, then you know you're sort of stuck with it. So you've got to be confident about your drawing and confident about where you need it to be white. So although this is a permanent wax oil pastel, slightly more expensive, you could use a child's Crayola white crayon, or you could use a white candle. Anything that's a wax and that's white or clear is going to form a resist. Okay, so I'll just do some lines with this as well. So the other thing is, obviously it's very difficult to see where you're putting your lines as you're doing your drawing. So like I say, you've got to be confident with your drawing and not overdo it. With highlights it's always best to have fewer rather than more, but okay, so you need to be confident with that. And like I say, any wax pastel will do, and a crayon or a candle. I'll just get a coloured one actually as well. So you can use, you know, if you wanted, and obviously the idea we're preserving some white, but you know, it does the same effect will work with coloured ones. So I'll just put a couple of colours on as well. So pop that to one side. And then of course the other thing is just to leave the paper dry. So I'll just get a pencil. So say this is your shape that you want to keep white, leave that dry, get some brushes and just paint round it. So you know that's, and if that bit of paper is dry there, it's not going to bleed out. So say we've got a wet piece of paper or a damp piece of paper and we wanted to keep the centre of that white, and we'll put the paint on to go around it. You can see it's bleeding in, so then you're going to lose your white. So keep the paper dry and then you can go around it without worrying that that white of the paper is going to be lost. So painting wet in wet's fun and you get some nice effects, but painting what we call wet onto dry is a good way of keeping a very precise drawing and keeping your paper white. Okay, so we'll just go back to this now, and it's not dry, isn't that? So there was another thing I was going to show you, and I'll just fill these in actually to show you this last technique. So this isn't so much about keeping the paper white, this is more a different effect, and that's using salt. And I thought I'd show you because I'm sure you've probably seen lots of people using it and wondered what the effect was really. So there you've got your paint on your paper, and basically it's a desiccant, it's attracting the moisture. You know yourself, if you leave your salt in a damp place in the kitchen or wherever, if it's damp, it soon becomes very moist. Yeah, it soon draws up the moisture. So that's what it's doing here. You're going to put it onto the paint, and what I do, I always do this, I always tip it out onto my hand rather than sprinkling the pot, so you've got a lot more control. So I just pinch it, and then you've got much more control about how much salt you're putting on, and you'll see almost immediately that that salt is bringing the paint towards it. Now it's going to take a while to dry. I might pause the video and come back to this because obviously we've got to wait for that masking fluid to dry as well. And I'll just try and tip that back into the salt pot. So you'll see quite a dramatic difference in this once it's dried. That salt's pulling in the paint, so you're going to get some little lighter areas. So the salt technique is useful for all sorts of things where you want to get a textured appearance on your painting. So if you imagine perhaps a gravel path, and you'll have lots of nice browns and greys in that path, and then you put the salt on, and that's going to give you some little highlights, make it look like some little stones and pebbles. You could use it for texture, you could use it in a seascape, for some spray. One thing I've used it in is when I've been doing a horse and I want it to be dappled. So in that case I used a much bigger salt. I used some of the more rock salty type sea salts, and made my horse dappled by putting the salt into the grey of the horse. So there are different things that you might want to use it for to get some texture, and you can perhaps see it's already starting to dry there and starting to make those shapes. But what I'll do now is I'll go away and I'll come back when both the masking fluid and the paint are dry. Okay, so both of those are dry now, and we'll have a look at the paint first of all. So can you see how we've made these lovely patterns where the salt's pulled the pigment up? So the only thing you need left to do now is to get a nice soft brush. I usually do this outside or over the bin and just get rid of those bits of salt. It's not such a good brush, is it? The bristles are coming off a bit. But something nice and soft that's not going to damage your paper, and get rid of that salt. It is important that you get rid of it, because if you come to have it framed, there's nothing worse than you get it framed and then bits of salt fall off away from your painting and end up in the frame. So make sure if you run your finger over it, you'll be able to feel that it's still rough if it's still got salt on. Okay, so I'll take a close-up picture of this later, but you can see you could use that for all sorts of things. And it's really going to depend, the effect that you have is going to depend on how wet it was when you put it on and how much salt you use. If your paper is absolutely sopping wet, if you've got a real puddle of paint and you put the salt into it, it won't be able to do this effect. Your paper, you just need a nice damp layer of paint, not sopping wet, for this to work. Okay, I've just got a hair there off of my brush. It's a terrible brush, that. So we'll now that the masking fluid's dry, we'll paint over that and over the wax so you can see the effect of both, and then we'll have to wait for it to dry again. So you just paint straight across the top of the masking fluid. If it's properly dry, you don't need to worry about it moving or spoiling. So just the main thing is it has to be dry. Just using a nice dark colour so that it all shows up well. Okay, so you can see immediately how effective this wax resist is. So it's stopping the paint from sticking to the paper, because the paint will not stick to that wax. So again, like I said, the main thing is you've got to make sure it's in the right place, because now there's nothing we can do to cover that up. Wouldn't matter how much paint you try putting on, even if you put it on neat from the... it's going to come back to white. Okay, so we'll just leave it to dry and then we'll take this masking fluid off. Okay, so you can see now it's dried. Where I tried going over that wax one, again it's not stayed on the wax there, so you cannot cover that up unless of course you're using acrylic or something like that. So now it comes to taking off the masking fluid. So first of all, make sure your paint is actually dry. You really should always do that with the back of your hand. You've got oils in your fingertips that don't do your paint any good. So try, if you just put the back of your hand on your paint like that, you'll be able to feel that it's cool and that it's dry. If you put your head to one side also, you'll be able to, and look across the surface of the paper, you'll be able to see if there's any shine there. So with the masking fluid, very, very gently, with the fingertip, just rub it off. And see how nice and bright that is, that white paper that we've got preserved. So you can imagine using that for snow or a highlight somewhere. And again, to make sure you've got it all, if you just run your finger across the surface of the paper, you'll feel if there's any left there. Okay, so the big difference really is that if you've put this in the wrong place, you're stuck with it. If you've put the masking fluid in the wrong place, it doesn't matter, because you can come back and paint on that piece of paper, and that's absolutely fine. So it's still the same paper as the rest of your paper, it's just preserved it whilst you've been working. And sometimes you'll think you've put too many highlights in, and you might just want to tone them down a bit. You might just want to make them slimmer, and come and work on top of them again. Okay, so you can see how that were useful for snow. You can see how this would be useful for frost actually. Looking at it with that nice blue, it's made a nice frosty colour. The other thing is, with the wax crayon, if you want some white and you've not left any paper and you've not done any of these techniques, it will draw on top of your watercolour. Okay, so it's obviously not a true watercolour because you're putting some wax over the top. Obviously you could put white ink over the top and you could put white acrylic over the top. You've not just got your watercolour there, but it's one way of getting that white back if you lost it. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. Like I say, I think you could use some of these techniques over the next few months, especially with snow and frost, both the salt and the masking fluid. And I like using the wax crayon, but like I say, you need to be confident about where your drawing is. But of course you could put a little pencil guideline and then go along the side of it. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Hope you get on okay with that, and bye for now.